Ladies and gentlemen, the warmongers welcome you. I am Lucas IV, and with me here is Hosh. Hello. And Kermit. Hello. And of course, the chat is here too, because this is happening on Hosh's stream. And in the first topic, we will talk not so much about privatization, but rather about the sale of the company Explosia, the state-owned company Explosia, which is currently under the Ministry of Trade and Industry, if I'm not mistaken, and therefore in the future under the Ministry of Economy. And through this ministry, Kermit, it is actually state-owned. It is actually part of or in cooperation with the private company Synthesia, which has a rather rich history with Andrej Babiš, to whom the state sold Synthesia. And then after Andrej Babiš, well, let's say, enjoyed owning this company, he sold it back to the state and made quite a good profit from it. By the way, this is the source of a lot of animosity between Miloš Zeman and Andrej Babiš, which seems to have died down now, but it was definitely there. Anyway, the company Explosia, a manufacturer of explosives, nitrocellulose, and the legendary creator of the legendary Semtex, which now is just a small part of their production, but right now their profits are growing massively. Their earnings are rising, and from the roughly 47 tons of nitrocellulose they used to produce in the past, they now want to reach 300 tons. From relatively low earnings in the past, they have increased their turnover by 30 and their net profit by 50 in recent years. So the company is really booming, of course, thanks to the massive increase in demand for detonators, nitrocellulose, explosives, and so on throughout Europe. At the same time, there is a big shortage of manufacturers of these things across Europe. So yes, financially, this company is handling it quite well so far and is getting into the black. But now it's being considered that the company should actually be sold off, that the Czech state should get rid of it. It should get rid of it, if we're being very optimistic, for about 16 billion crowns. And the big argument for getting rid of it is that right now you can still squeeze something out of it. And even though the company is growing quite a lot, it also wants to massively expand production. So the state isn't getting any money from it, because all the profits have to be reinvested back into it. And that's a big argument for actually selling it. But the problem is that they want to sell it. One option is to sell it to the private Czech company Kota, but at the same time, it should also be sold to the French state-owned company Urenco. Which is a bit strange, because we're not really talking about privatization here, but about the state selling a state-owned company to another state. So guys, what do you think about this, and do you think it's a good move? Because I feel like the state shouldn't really own factories. Yeah, not even of this type. It doesn't seem completely necessary to me. So it would be a very good move to sell it to some private owner. For example, to Stranovi, or maybe just to Colt or some other arms manufacturer. To a private arms manufacturer? But when we have to sell it to another state-owned company, especially to the French, it doesn't seem like a very good deal to me. So guys, what's your opinion on this matter?
My opinion on this matter is that I don't approve of selling the state-owned company Explosia, because Babiš did say that Explosia itself doesn't have any contact with the army, which, if I checked correctly, is true. But that's because they don't manufacture, they don't directly make things for the army, but they do so indirectly.
They don't make the end product, they only produce for those who manufacture for the army, right?
Yes. Yes, so I don't agree with Andrej Babiš that we should sell it, because getting rid of such a strategically important company at a time like this, when we know the forecast will get even worse, is, in my opinion, complete nonsense. Yeah, he did say that if we sell it, we can put the money into the army and meet the 2% defense spending target. But that's just terrible populism.
Kermit?
Well, I agree in general, like I'm for privatization, but if we're talking about privatizing, there are definitely other things that are less strategic than a huge explosives factory at a time when war is approaching. Like, for example, a brewery which no matter who we sold it to, it probably wouldn't matter at all.
Well, about the brewery, yeah, the thing is that the brewery makes money for the state, whereas Explosia doesn't make money because there are big investments going on there. So Andrej Babiš says it's smarter to sell it now for those 16 billion or 20 billion while the company still has that value. Because if the situation, I don't know, changed for the better, the value could drop significantly, demand could drop, and the future profits from the company might not materialize. And at that moment, it's actually a good deal because you get a guaranteed 16 or 20 billion, whereas the company isn't really, I mean, it's in the black, but it's not profitable because it's reinvesting. Right? So maybe this is actually a good deal.
That's a similar argument as if you said, I'll go buy a kebab and a coke because my doctor told me I should walk more.
Okay, and how is that argument similar? Can you explain it? I really don't see it there.
This argument, in my opinion, is just, how do I put it? It's an argument you just make up. Like for anything you want to sell, you'll always find some argument for it. At least one. That's what this is like. Well, it's not really making us money right now, so if I sell it, at least I'll get some money and that'll be great. Except you won't have that big factory anymore, which could grow in the future. It's like selling your house and saying, wow, I'm homeless now, but I've got 15 million in my account.
But here the problem is that if the state sells it, it will sell it with what's called a golden share, which basically gives the state the right to take control over the company if needed. So even though the state wouldn't own it, first of all, the company would still pay taxes here. So the income from the company would still go to the state. And the state currently only gets income from taxes anyway, because as I said, there's no profit since it's all reinvested. So in this respect, the state wouldn't lose anything. And in the future, if tax revenues increase, the state's budget income would also increase, plus you add those certain 16 on top of that. 20 billion, although some pessimists say 6 billion, but let's say on average it's 10 billion, you'll get that for sure now. So why frame it as if we're getting rid of it completely when the state will still have control in case of a crisis and will still get income from it as long as taxes are paid here? Besides that, I would argue here that there's a statement from the state or from Andrej Babiš where he said that if it were sold to the French state-owned company, then 51% would be owned by a Czech private owner and 49% would be owned by the French company, the state-owned company. So Czech capital would be combined here and basically Czech control that kind of aggressive private activity of Colt with the know-how of the French. So isn't it in some way something that could actually turn out positively in the end? Isn't it a step in the right direction? Because you suggested here that we're going to get rid of it completely, that we'll lose everything, and that it won't be possible to get it back, which doesn't really seem true to me. So guys, you can jump in on it too, but first, Kermit.
Well, in the case of war, the state can still nationalize the company back, right? Just like other properties, we saw that during COVID in Germany, right? When all medical supplies on German territory were being confiscated en masse, even if they didn't belong to any German companies and it was just goods. So this golden share can be bypassed. And I'll go back to saying it's basically like if you sold your house. So I may not have a roof over my head, but I have 15 million in my account, you know, who has more? You may sell it now, even though it's not making money at the moment. The forecast is that the company could probably start making money if it expands, but that won't last forever. And you simply get rid of a strategic business that is very promising. For that, you get about 16 billion now, which still doesn't seem like much to me. The turnover is huge, right? Thank you.
The turnover isn't actually that massive. The turnover, as I see it, is in the range. It's in the range of hundreds of millions, yeah. So here I see the net profit after tax, 42 or 442 million crowns, and the financial result is 500 million, yeah, for the year. So, but all of this gets reinvested back. So in reality, the state gets they have in mind about 100 million in taxes. Yeah. So in this regard, 16 billion, that's basically how many years would the company have to pay these taxes for it to add up to 16 billion? 16 years. No. 160 years. Mathematics, yes. The math isn't mathing.
Out of all the state-owned companies, it still seems to me that if we start with some privatization, Explosia definitely wouldn't be the first, or the fifth, or the 10th, not even in the top 30. We still have a brewery, so if we need to get rid of something, let's make it the brewery.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that because, Kermit, you're completely ignoring the fact that the brewery makes money while Explosia doesn't make any, right? It reinvests them, so we only make money from taxes.
Yeah, sure, but reinvesting is different from losing money. If it was losing money or if it was just breaking even every year, then fine, get rid of it, we'll get the money and let whoever buys it deal with it. After that, it's not really our problem anymore. But here, the field it's in is obviously super promising for the future, so it's only going to get better. Let's say it's already pretty good now, and those reinvestments will eventually end or slow down. The company can't grow forever.
Thank you. All right, Hochi. I think selling is stupid. Keeping it isn't that stupid, but there's still a much better option. Yeah, it's not about whether the company is making money or not. It's just that it has potential for the future, and there are very few companies in Europe doing what Explosia does. It's a very valuable commodity. So why get rid of it? And my point is that we could play it to our best advantage, which is that the state keeps 51% and invites a company to take the remaining 49%. Yeah, we can see abroad that it works, that the state will just hold the majority and everything else will simply be handled by some company. If you look, the first three companies that come to my mind are, for example, the French KNDS. KNDS, a huge arms conglomerate where the majority is actually owned by the French state and the rest is owned by one or two companies. It's the same with the Finnish Patria or the Polish Armaments Group. These are all companies where the state owns the majority. These are hugely valuable strategic companies, and the rest is taken by one entity that drives the whole thing forward. And there are those bonuses that first you keep the strategic company, and second, the company will continue to grow because you'll have the firm that's driving it forward. And third, well, actually, just these two. I can't think of a third right now.
All right, I'm not that pessimistic. I understand that the state would want to get rid of it because they want to get the money quickly, which they might use for defense in some way. And it wouldn't completely come under the control of the French state. Actually, the most cited idea is that it would be merged with Synthesia. Yeah, then it would be bought by Colt, which is a Czech company. They would have 51%, and then the French would have 49%. The question is, why involve the French in this? What do you think about it? Is it purely the argument that the French company has better know-how and can provide it? Or do you see the conspiracy theory that's spreading around here behind it? That Andrej Babiš wants to sell our explosives company to the French or the French state in exchange for them stopping his investigation there. Kermit?
I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but the fact that the company is also state-owned really adds to it, I think. After all, if Andrej needs to settle things with anyone, it's definitely France first, because that's where he actually faces the risk of being jailed. And if the French happen to come up with a very lucrative idea, why would Andrej care about some explosives company, right? But as long as it doesn't interfere with his fields, he basically doesn't care. Even for 16 billion, that seems like just a drop in the bucket. It's not really the kind of money that would make a big difference for us. How much can we build with that? 10 kilometers of highway.
So 16 billion, that's really just a drop in the ocean when it comes to our debt, since our debt is about 300 billion this year, right? So really, those 16 billion aren't much. Even if those 16 billion were put into defense, it would only slightly ease the funding shortfall, but I don't think we would even reach the 2%. However, Hoki, what do you think about it? Do you think you're more of a fan of that conspiracy theory? Or would you rather believe that there's some strategic intention to combine French know-how and Czech money?
I would completely avoid that theory, even though it makes sense. I would skip it. And I would rather go with the idea that Andrej Babiš is a classic first-rate populist. Even though we could have spent 2% on armaments, we would have just shoved that money somewhere else in a completely populist way. And here it actually showed us that we can get rid of a state-owned company, give it to the French, score points with them, and then we can invest that money in the army. There was also a caveat, if I'm not mistaken, from Andrej Babiš, if the army has something to spend it on. And since Andrej Babiš criticizes the army, saying that the army doesn't have things to spend money on, it logically seems to me that those 16 billion would just disappear who knows where.
I understand. Personally, at this moment, I'm not completely convinced that it's a good deal. Yeah. I really don't like the huge influence of the French state-owned company there, because personally, I wouldn't mind if Explosia was taken over by a Czech entity and a French private company. At that moment, I'd be like, yeah, why not? Give it to the private owners. The state shouldn't own factories, and with taxes, we'll have money anyway. They'll invest in it. The French will bring know-how. It'll be fine. It'll be all right. In case of some crisis, it can be nationalized, or some law can be used, or that golden share the state will have can be used, so it can serve the purposes the state needs. So at that moment, I don't really see any significant risks or major problems there. But honestly, so I really don't like the idea that a Czech state-owned company should just be mostly transferred to a French state-owned company. That seems like going from the frying pan to the fire. And the fact that a Czech private company will have 51% that does improve it, but for me, it's still not ideal, right?
I just want to point out one thing. This year, we are not meeting the 2% of GDP for defense, which is a big problem, as we all know. Therefore, we should sell Explosia. Alright, let's say that's valid to a certain extent. What will happen next year when we don't spend 2% on defense? Yes.
We'll sell that brewery.
Yeah. And in 10 years, we'll sell Prague Castle too, right?
Well, with Pavelin on him, you bought it. Yeah.
It seems to me like Andrej Babiš is saving us from his own decision, and I find it really ridiculous.
Well, look, the important thing is that this whole matter with the sale is still just under consideration. So far, no significant steps have been taken, and I assume that as soon as Andrej Babiš finds out that people don't like it, here in our poll in the chat, 83 people are voting against the sale of Explosia, he'll back out of it. What do you think, guys? No?
Well, Andrej Babiš always makes decisions based on polls. Unfortunately, I don't think that a poll in our chat is relevant enough to influence Andrej Babiš.
Sorry, but I feel like Andrej Babiš's voters are allergic to selling off state property. You keep hearing it all the time, how we've sold everything off and nothing belongs to us anymore, right? And it's mainly Andrej Babiš's voters who are saying this. By the way, SPD is putting their foot down, saying they won't just stand by while state property is being sold off, which SPD would put their foot down even if we were making a good deal, right? Even if the ammunition factory went to the best possible owner, even if it was being bought by Sternad, who Babiš would never sell it to, of course, but even if Sternad was buying it and it would fit perfectly into his artillery shell portfolio, right? SPD would still be against it because they're just out of touch, right? But at this moment, the fact that they're against it basically plays into our hands because selling it to a French state-owned company, that's just a bit strange. No. Anyway, what did you say about what Andrej Babiš will do? Kochi? As a populist? Well,
Yeah, he's a pure populist. We've seen it. This is his third stint in government. He was prime minister twice. And he always decides based on what his voters' polls tell him. And lately, I've noticed among people around me that Andrej Babiš's voters approve of the steps Andrej Babiš takes without looking at the consequences. That is the kind of voter research. So I don't think those voters would be terribly against it, or that they would even care about it. They'll just say it's another state-owned company just like Czech Post, so why not sell it? Now we'll make 16 billion on it.
well, I guess I'll have to argue with you about that because in my opinion, Andrej Babiš's voters are really against selling off state property. They're the kind of people who don't really understand why, for example, the state doesn't own, I don't know, Škoda, for instance. They're really the kind of people who get upset that the waterworks here were owned by the French and so on. That's it.
Okay, I get what you're hinting at, but I still think Andrej Babiš will try to play it like we don't want wars, so why should we have an arms company here? Why does the state need an arms company if we seek peace?
Well, I don't know. I really don't know. This seems really, really strange to me. Anyway, final evaluation, final word. Are you for or against what we've been talking about here? And if so, what's the main argument for you? Why do you feel the way you do? Kermit?
Well, I wouldn't sell it. It's a company in a promising sector. There are profits, not as big as in some other state enterprises maybe, but they're there. And in my opinion, the company will only grow in the future. If we want to privatize something, sure, let's do it. But I would definitely start with completely different companies than these, which also have some strategic importance.
For example, Hotel Thermal.
Yes.
So guys, well,
I wouldn't sell it either, especially not to a foreign company or another country, since it's a strategic enterprise in a promising sector, and even the Czech army relies on it and needs it. There are very few such companies in Europe, which is why the prices are so high. So if I were to let it go, as I said, I would follow the example of Finland and Patria. The state keeps 51% and sells the rest. The rest simply goes to the company.
Or you could turn it into a joint stock company, right? Similarly, it could become something like Ches.
Like every citizen could buy a piece of their own Explosia.
That's right, like a publicly owned factory. Of course, I just used that word completely wrong now.
But it's like, everyone, everything for everyone.
So, for example, in Norway, it works like this. They have public oil revenues. So the state actually uses the profits from oil as something from which it pays dividends to Norwegian citizens, right? And I think that's pretty smart. Anyway, as for my view on Explosia, personally, I would sell it, but I would sell it to Strada and Colt or someone like that. I wouldn't sell it to the French. That's actually what bothers me about it, that it's being sold to a French state-owned company. That really seems to me like it's just going from one state to another. If it's going to be sold in such a way that some state will simply have 50% control, then let it be the Czech state and not the French state. That's my opinion. No. And since we've already touched on the topic of Andrej Babiš, before we wrap it up, officially Andrej Babiš is in a conflict of interest and the European Union is telling us, look, you idiots, do whatever you want with him. Give him money from your own budget if you want, but we won't be sending you anything. That's what they're actually telling us from the EU. So yeah, Andrej Babiš will lose European money and the Czech taxpayer will pay for it from Czech taxes. Isn't that great?
No, it isn't. I've looked forward to this throughout all 4 years of the Fiala government. I could hardly sleep waiting for it.
It's great, right, guys?
It's amazing.
It's wonderful. So, ladies and gentlemen, everyone watching here, remember that in every loaf of bread from Panam, there's a grain that you paid extra for just so you could buy it at all. That's how it is. Yeah. Explosia, Synthesia, Franticia, the Czech state, and Andrej Babiš. That was the topic for us warmongers. Of course, you can watch the whole stream if you join live. So join live, share the streams, write comments, like, and of course on Hero, you'll find the complete recording of the entire stream without any editing. But with this, we're ending the topic of selling off state property. But of course, the stream continues.